صباح الخير أو مساء الخير للكل. أهلا وسهلا فيكم. Bienvenue à toutes et à tous and Happy New Year. I know we're already the end of January, but I guess it's never too late to wish you all a wonderful New Year ahead. And
Mhm.
for those who celebrate, I'd also like to extend warm wishes for the Lunar New Year. May this year of snake bring health, joy, and success to everyone. It's such a pleasure to have you all with us today for what promises to be a super insightful session. أنا اسمي لانا زعيتر وأنا طالبة دكتوراه بجامعة ماجيل. I'm a PhD candidate in Educational Studies at McGill University, and I'm delighted to be your host for today's Speaker Series book launch of The Racialized Nature of Academic Language, Disentangling the Racial Linguistic Power Structures. I would first like to start with the land acknowledgement. McGill University is situated in Montreal, the traditional territory of the Kanien'kehá:ka people. Montreal has long served as a site of meeting and exchange among many First Nations. We recognize and respect the Kanien'kehá:ka as the traditional custodians of the lands and waters on which we gather today. I also invite each of you to reflect on and acknowledge the Indigenous lands in your own context. Today, we are incredibly fortunate to have such an incredible panel of scholars, researchers, and educators, making this event an extraordinary opportunity to engage with their impactful work. To start us off, I'll turn it over now to Dr. Angelica Galante, the director of the Plurilingual Lab, who will introduce our speakers in more detail.
Well, welcome everybody. I hope you're all doing well. As you know, this series is an ongoing series that we have on a monthly basis, always on the last Thursday of the month. So stay tuned for the next talk. But for today, we are very excited to have the first time that we have the Plurilingual Lab series being hosted in hybrid mode. So, of course, I'm here in Montreal, but there are people who are all over the world, and we have Dr. Sultan Turken, who is one of the co-editors of the book in Belfast with a team of people in a room right there. So it's very exciting to welcome you all from Belfast. So welcome. Well, this book is a very important book edited by Dr. Sultan Turken and Jamie Chazelle, who are both here with us and who have invited chapter contributors to come and share a little bit of the work with us. We won't have too much time per person, about 4 to 5 minutes per person, but at least we can get a little snippet of what their chapter is and hopefully engage in a very joyful discussion in the very end of this talk. So they're going to have about an hour, and then we have about 30 minutes to chat in the end. So please stay for the chat because that's usually when lots of discussions and lots of ideas emerge, and it's very cool. All right, so thank you all for coming. I'll go move it back to Lana, who will give us a little bit of the etiquette in the Zoom.
So during the talk, please keep your video and sound off. However, you may use the thumbs up and hands clapping features to react to our speakers' presentations. The talk will be recorded and available on the Plurilingual Lab channel, YouTube channel. So make sure to follow us on social media to know when the talk will be available. After the talk, we will have a 30-minute discussion. You can post your questions in the chat box or simply unmute your microphone to ask your question. The discussion will be moderated by Miguel Sanchez and will not be recorded. So without further ado, I will now turn it over to Dr. Turkan.
Thank you so much, Lana. Thank you so much, Angelica. You can all hear me okay? Yes? Just want to check, and I would like to share my screen. It's okay, everyone. All right. You're all very welcome, colleagues and friends, to the launch of the book, Racialized Nature of Academic Language, Disentangling the racial linguistic power structures. Much appreciation goes to Bloomsbury Publishing and for receiving and hosting this book well. Also would like to acknowledge McGill University Center for the Study of Learning and Performance, Dr. Angelica Galante, and our own contributing author, Ben Kalman, for inviting this book launch. To my colleague, Dr. Aisling O'Boyle, our center director here in Belfast, the Center for Language Education Research, for hosting this wonderful gathering in person with drinks. Everyone has a glass here, and a few nibbles. So it's a wonderful gathering with friends and colleagues. I am Sultan Türkan, and I'm senior lecturer in bilingual education here at Queen's. I guess I might be bold if Jamie allows me to, but I may be so bold to say that I brought this book to life in collaboration with my dear colleague and friend, Jamie. Without this collaboration, it wouldn't have been possible. And without the contributions of our authors on this volume, some of whom are with us today, the book would not have been able to illustrate what really is at stake in various communities and contexts. While chapters take their life force from contextual issues in the US, Canada, and South Africa, the issues raised are pertinent to the global trends and tensions when it comes to welcoming bilinguals and multilinguals in schooling, educational contexts, formal or non-formal. With that, the book is divided into 3 sections. If I may move this, you can all see the screen. Hopefully, we have the table of contents there. The first section is dedicated to unpack the theoretical underpinnings of academic language and connections to eugenics and power. In the second section, current and past practices and challenges, documenting cycles of deficit perspectives reproduced through hegemonic structures and registered in academic language in various formal and non-formal settings, are shared by authors in individual chapters. Mariana Alvallero Reclefs, Monisha Atkinson, and Donna De Gennaro, Lillian Ardell, and co-authors Karis Jones, Dorsa Fahami, Ben Kalman, Dimitri Detweiler, and myself, Sultan Türkan. And the third section is looking for ways to maneuver the power nuts and disentangle the enmeshment, what I would call enmeshment academic language holds in systemic structures. In this section, chapters are presented by Madiba Stellenbosch, Melody Zoh, and her co-authors Amy Vetter, Beverly Faircloth, Tina Martin, and Shreya Sangaya, and our concluding chapter by my colleague Jamie Chisel. So all these, the chapters in the third section are forging what Ofelia Garcia calls a camino for the future by recognizing the wounds, she says, heridas, suffered by many who perceive their language practices as corrupt simply because of the colonization and racialization processes they have been subjected to. So what does this book do? What is at stake here, really? We think this book foregrounds and centers the experiences of people who face this marginalization because of performing the standard language. And by foregrounding the experiences and perspective, we hope that there is no erasure of their experiences and perspectives. Important to note, obviously, what the book is not about, right? The book is not about demonizing or eradicating academic language, but about celebrating multiplicity of voices. Not about putting one camp of academic scholars against others or perpetuating ego wars. We believe divisions only lead to more divisions. Now, without further ado, I would like to launch our book by first offering what I call an invocation to the book that shares the story behind the book. Then each author who could join us here today will take about 4 minutes to share the context, main arguments, and a quote representative of their individual chapter. And hopefully we will have time for questions and answers. So in the introduction, we unpack the idea of enregisterment and academic language. So now please allow me to share the story behind the book. Years ago, as an international PhD student in Tucson, Arizona, I read David Berliner's book, Collateral Damage: How High-Stakes Testing Corrupts America's Schools. Berliner and Sharon Nichols were drawing on Campbell's law, which essentially states that the more high stakes attached to a social decision-making, the more its essence will be subjected to corruption pressures and eventually corrupt or distort the social processes it's associated with. While employed at Educational Testing Service, this principle stayed with me and would come to mind, especially when sitting on various TOEFL and domestic English language learner projects. These projects would attempt to extract and separate academic language from social domains of language use, because this extraction, this separation was psychometrically essential in order not to introduce construct irrelevant variants. There and then, I started noticing academic language had an essence. It had a leg, an arm, its own posture, its own way of sitting and taking up space in big committee meetings. In these committee meetings, academics like Anna Ul-Shamat would also take her seat to help tease out the construct that was also sitting in our midst. Essential to note here, late Anna Chermat had developed cognitive academic language learning approach and published in TESOL Quarterly 1987, with an eye toward helping bridge the limited English proficient students to the mainstream, right? Mainstream. In the long committee meetings would I start noticing how academic language would be sat on a high pedestal, was being positioned or enregistered as the gateway to success, with the logic that there are achievement gaps between English learner and non-English learner student populations. The interpretive argument was that academic language, being the language of schooling, needs to be taught to English learners, and there would be arguments about the relationship between performance in academic language and academic success. But now we know, at least through a review revealed by Trucken Miller, 2019, that relationship between academic language proficiency at both sentence and vocabulary levels and academic success in reading and math is actually weak, 10 years at best. But then, of course, success had to be monitored through assessments. Assessments had to be designed in a way that the language of content and general language proficiency had to be teased out. Teachers' quality of teaching was associated with this and was associated with the extent to which all students, including English learners, met certain standards in reading and math. With that, academic language would gain even more pedestal status, but in the end, essence, in my opinion, has gotten distorted because of the high stakes associated and attached to it. Alongside the social processes of what it means to succeed in life and at school are also being distorted, I would argue. Suresh Kanagaraja is right in stating in his chapter in our book, that there was a substantial group of scholars in those committee meetings who believed that the norms of academic register in English are neutral and universal. However, through the notion of enregisterment, we come to see that registers can be value-laden and ideological. Certain types of people get enregistered with certain types of language use. Registers are encapsulated in language use, could serve to discriminate groups and draw visible or invisible boundaries between appropriate, inappropriate, standard, and non-standard. And our contributing author, Christian Faltis, actually lists quite a few number of divisions, right? So those whose languaging is identified as academically able based on their use of academic language are essentially racialized through differentiations of possessing or lacking academic expertise or skills. Christian, in his chapter, points to the elusiveness of the academic language notion as being loosely defined and often found in written texts, usually expository. Right? And he says, well, language in classrooms is part teachers' localized language and mirrors written language. But such narrow definition of academic language leaves out and misses out all the diverse ways in which languaging happens in classrooms. And Christian illustrates from a lesson actually on cause and effect relationships, right? How Alamo, a war between Texans and Mexicans, is presented through a monolithic lens, maintaining a narrative on the hegemonic portrayer of the empire over the need for slavery in Texas and to take land from Mexico. So how does then tapping into the academic language of cause and effect reflect the diverse, pluralistic realities present in the classroom? This is a question we ask in this book, and all the authors in this book, in fact, asking their own ways, in different ways, from their own respective contexts, they ask the question of whose ideas and ideologies are enregistered in academic language? Whose ideas and ideologies are enregistered in academic language? So to Ofelia Garcia's words in the foreword, and I am ending in a second here, the value of this book is that it focuses not on the maneuvering of minoritized populations, but on the manipulation around language that has been conducted by dominant majorities to ensure their power and dominance. By focusing on different societal contexts and speaking from the experience of language minoritized students, teachers, researchers, this book exposes how the concept of academic language has been a societal maneuver to subtly manipulate schooling so that power remains in the hands of white dominant people. The racialized nature of academic language is thus revealed, unquote. These are Rafael Garcia's words. So with that, I now turn to Suresh Kanagaraja, who couldn't join us today, unfortunately, but kindly recorded his video introducing his chapter to you all.
Congratulations to Sultan and Jamie for this important publication on academic communication. I think this is a much needed book for two important reasons. One is that many times when we show the possibilities of plurilingual practices in various social domains or in classrooms or in writing, many critics point out that these are playful situations, but in academic writing, which is very high stakes and often censored and controlled, as in academic publications, that is not possible. They would say diversification of language or creativity in language is not possible in high stakes academic writing. Secondly, from a different set of critics, there is the view that academic register is neutral, that it doesn't belong to any particular social community. And they believe that complaining, criticizing against academic communication is misleading because it's just a neutral register. Both views are wrong, and this book explores why those criticisms don't hold water. To start with the last point first, all the way from Basil Bernstein, there are a lot of sociolinguists and sociologists of language, including Pierre Bourdieu, who have argued that the dominant communities have an advantage in many institutionalized registers. That's the way in which social reproduction works. The dominant communities for Bourdieu and Bernstein, it was the class difference, but we could add race difference as well. The dominant class and race communities have a vested interest in informing the institutionalized registers with their varieties. And we know that, and to just take an extreme situation, in publications, in academic publications, there is a lot of people think there is no place for African American English, Indian English, or Hispanic varieties of English, so it's not neutral. Secondly, the fact that high stakes writing is not open to diversity is also not true, because we already see a lot of writers from the African American community, and all the way from writers starting from Gloria Anzaldúa, who have been code meshing in their writing. They have brought their own varieties of English into the dominant genres to pluralize this writing, to represent their voices and ideological interests. So I analyzed in my article the writings of J. Loss Finneman, a well-known sociolinguist, who uses Black English in her academic writing, once again, to practice her position that Black English and a lot of other less privileged languages are rule governed and legitimate. So I borrowed from linguistic anthropology some constructs to show how that kind of writing is meaningful and possible. How it is that writers from less privileged language backgrounds are able to use their varieties of English in academic writing. So to consider the body of a single article, I borrow the notion intextualization. Michael Silverstein defines it as coming into textual formatness. So a lot of talk in informal contexts, in seminars, in conferences, and also in diverse registers and varieties when they become textualized, they have a coherence and they become meaningful, or they come from so many different backgrounds. And how that is possible, there are various strategies authors might use. One is framing, that is, you frame your essay in a particular way where readers are prepared to see your voice and general diversity. Secondly, core text, that is in surrounding your varieties of English or your languages are other texts that give it meaning. So even a person who doesn't understand Black English or Indian English can understand from the whole context, the core text, what those words mean. And just a third strategy is meta-pragmatic resources, that is authors refer back to their own writing or comment on their own writing or their own lectures. And that's another way in which we understand words that we might not understand, might not expect, and may not be familiar with in the body of a single text. But a second set of strategies English anthropologists call enregistering, and that is how a corpus of words become associated with a particular communicated activity. So when we say this is how people in Brooklyn talk, or this is how people in Pittsburgh talk, or this is how Italian Americans speak, or Greek Americans speak, all these forms of communication were not arbitrary or pre-given. It wasn't the fact that they always spoke like that, or those languages were associated with them all the time. It happens over time when ways of talking get associated with particular identities, communicative activities. So how we have a particular register now called academic communication, and we think it's already kind of established. It's because of the register, this particular corpus of words got associated with academic writing. But it can change, and these are linguistic anthropologists suggest that diversification is possible, the genre can change, the type of register can change, and for that, we need scholars from minoritized backgrounds to use their own varieties of English or their own languages to bring more diversity into academic communication. So it takes a long time. It's a historical and social process. It doesn't happen on one day. Also, it requires social uptake. More and more people have to get used to seeing diversity, engaging with that diversity, and then associating this particular variety of language with that activity. So imagine before 16th century, Latin was the lingua franca of academic communication. Something happened after that. Another language got enregistered as the normative language for academic communication, English. And it's told that scholars, scientists like Newton, in their first half of their life, academic life, they wrote their articles in Latin. And then he switched to English. Imagine how difficult it might have been, how creative it would have been, how bold it would have been for Newton to change his corpus, that is the type of words he used for communication. But it did ignite a change, and we now have a different lingua franca, and it can change in the future if more and more people start using their own languages and use varieties in writing. I believe after scholars like Gloria Salva, so many African American scholars like Keith Gilead, my own colleague, then Julia Swiderman, and so many more, including many of the writers who are included in this book, are engaged in bringing their own varieties of language and English, and they are orchestrating a change in the register. So I wish good luck to all my colleagues in this book and other critical scholars in making this change possible. Thank you.
We now go to Christian Faltis. Professor Christian Faltis is here with us. Christian, over to you.
Okay, here we are. Thank you. Thank you for this opportunity. I'm talking to you today from Laredo, Texas. It's right on the border with Mexico. This side is called the Rio Grande, and on just the other side is called the Rio Bravo. And this is the land of the Carrizo, but what the Spanish-speaking people call them, but they're the Yemes and the Borrado and the Lipan Apaches. But there were no groups that were settled here. This is the land that they would hunt and move through. There's also a Kickapoo tribe a little bit north of us, and this is their land at first. This chapter.
Your video, is it on my end, or I'm not sure if your video is turned on?
Oh no, it isn't.
Okay.
Oh, there I am. Okay, thank you.
To see you. Yeah.
Oh, okay. I wasn't sure if I was supposed to be on there. Like, okay, this was a wonderful opportunity to write a chapter like this, because I had been really thinking a great deal about, especially moving here, the ways that the school districts and the students themselves talked about their languaging practices, and I was looking into some of the work by Gerald Roche on necro-political language ideologies and that kind of stuff, and so this chapter is really for people who work in teacher education and bilingual teachers, especially those working with Spanish-speaking communities in the United States, who speak a local variety of Spanish and not the global variety that Ophelia talks about, or Mike Mena calls the language elsewhere. And the main idea of this chapter is to for teacher educators and teachers alike to understand that language and academic context is a monolingual ideological construction that benefits the hegemons, those in power, or what Foucault calls the regimes of truth that are passed on to the people below. And I agree totally with Jim G, who said there's no such thing as academic language. There are lots of different ways of using language in academic context, and so I talk about language in academic context, and there are lots of different ways that we can do that. And I've been in a lot of classrooms, and I don't see anything like academic language. I mean, when teachers are working on vocabulary development and all of those things, yes, the words are put up and they're spelled this and they want to point to that and stuff, but the language that happens in providing accessibility and participation to those students is what leads to successful learning, and that happens through a lot of ways that people can use language, and not just some idea about that teachers or academic contexts are all done in academic language. So I think it's really, and I talk a little bit in the chapter about Bix and Calp as it's a fundamental idea here in Texas. They teach the idea of Bix and Calp, and they want all their teachers to have Calp, even though it's a faulty distinction, and it's really not based on any real understanding of language in academic context. And so I also bring in the idea of George Bunch's work on the language of ideas, because what it does is it moves away from this idea of academic language to, well, there's the language of ideas, and how can we, elicit ideas from students, and then interpret what those students are saying about those ideas, and then provide feedback to them as we teach. And that's I like that idea, except for as Dr. Turkin pointed out, you know, here in Texas, the ideas that are passed on to the children, because there's no DEI here, and it's very colonial centric and white centric here, that the ideas also need to be deconstructed and taught about and questioned, you know, and I give the example of the Alamo, where these heroes, so-called heroes, were fighting the horrible Mexicans who were murderers, and but they never mentioned that they had slaves inside the Alamo, and they were actually fighting for slavery for the South. So there's just you know, I try to have a chapter that you know, academics can read and get that ideological clarity and really begin to question their own understandings of how it's been, you know, incentivized to them to pick up, and what rewards are they given, and how have they been complicit in using academic language in a way that really is not helpful to local language users or racialized users of English across the country. So I think that's about 4 minutes. So
Thank you, Christian.
did I do all right there, Sultan?
I am hoping it's all right.
Okay. Okay.
Okay, Madiba,
Oh,
Professor
wow.
Madiba, is he with us? I know he was going to join us.
I hope he does.
Angelica, is Jamie?
I haven't heard back from him. I messaged him at the beginning of the meeting. So he
Yeah.
might have some connection issues.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Well, hopefully he will join us. We can move to Lillian Ardell. Lillian, are you here?
Lillian, you're muted.
Yes, of course. Yes. Zoom got to me first. Hello, my name is Dr. Lillian Ardell. I am dialing in from Chicago, Illinois, although this research takes place in the Northeast, one of the big cities of the United States in the Northeast, where I collected my dissertation research. And I'm speaking on behalf today of my two co-authors, Dr. Karis Jones and Dr. to-be Dorsa Fahami. So the three of us put this chapter together.
Mm-hmm.
And this is a study. It's a case study of four primary elementary school teachers that have multilingual learners in their classrooms. Two of them were certified bilingual teachers, and two did not carry those certifications. And yet they were all tasked with managing language and teaching, and certainly this topic of academic language in their fourth and fifth grade classrooms. As a part of my data collection, I asked each of them to look at a state language policy document that really had a lot of content around the use and the instruction of academic language for the success of the emergent bilingual students in these schools. And as my colleagues and I were going through the transcript and looking at their sort of elicited reactions, I gave them the policy. A week later, I sat down for an interview and I asked them what their impressions were. And unsurprisingly, we found a lot of tensions. The teachers pointed out a lot of what one quote calls mixed messages around interpreting the standards for academic instruction for these students and really thinking about what access and what is best for this population. So as we started to analyze and think about the construct of academic language, which I will add in my portion, we quote Rosanna Lippi Green as referring to it as a mythical unicorn. It's sort of this thing that people speak to, but you can never really quite spot a unicorn, but we believe in it somehow. And that is following from Dr. Faltis, quite similar, that there is, researchers have tried to, in Cummins, with a psychological cognitive perspective, gives us a set of these things, and we could call it a constellation of features that appear in academic work. But what we found is that it really enregistered values of whiteness, of upper middle class languaging, and that these felt really inaccessible insofar as the teachers were translating and trying to take it up with their students, multilingual and monolingual alike. And so we used a figured worlds analysis to understand these competing sort of spaces that the teachers tried to straddle in order to provide that support to their multilinguals. And I suppose that our finding, and so one other thing that I wish to point out in my section today. I am a staff developer. I work in higher education. I work in job embedded training with teachers. And they're always throwing around this word, academic rigor. And I wonder if any of the audience or people on this call hears that word rigor, and that really means something very impressive, right? And so we were sort of holding rigor and high expectations as indexical figures for the teachers. And then I was the researcher. I saw ample evidence of high expectations of these teachers. Christian saying yes, holding their students to really high, and they're doing it with culturally and linguistically sustaining pedagogies. And it could be academically rigorous, and students can use a range of verbal and written responses to achieve it there. So I guess the takeaway here is, can we just loosen the reins a little bit around what we value? And I think that goes back to Schultan's initial point about sitting on these boards at ETS and feeling like, what if we opened up the gates to allow for wider languaging practices to be included and accounted for in what we accept as academically rigorous? Wouldn't that be an interesting way to go through? So if I leave you with anything, clap back to rigor and expand our notions of what high expectations can look like, and fight like hell so that we can achieve it. Thank you so much to the editors for including our work in there, and I can't wait to hear what your juicy questions are about this chapter and the whole volume. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Lillian, for staying within the time. That's wonderful. Thank you so much. And we go to yes, I'm going to be timing from now on. So Angelica doesn't come after me. Monisha Atkinson and Donna De Gennaro. I'm sorry.
De Janeiro.
Hi, Monisha.
Yes. Hi, how are you?
I'm good. Lovely.
Good.
And for everyone, some of it's our chapter contributors here meeting on this call for the first time. Over to you, Manisha. Thank you so much.
Okay, no problem. Before I begin, though, I did want to acknowledge my ancestors and pay tribute to those that have we lost due to forced enslavement, medical genocide, and inequitable access to resources, and numerous other systemic anti-Black structures that exist in the not yet United States. I am Monisha Atkinson. I am grateful to have this opportunity. I express my gratitude to be included in this work. My colleague, Dr. De Janeiro, and I don't think she's on the call, but this work is, very passionate for both of us. A lot of it has been influenced by my lived experiences, as well as by the great works of Dr. April Baker-Bell and Dr. G, or Geneva Smitherman. When she spoke to Dr. April Bell spoke about teachers not realizing that standard or proper English is a byproduct of white supremacy. And that's exactly what it is. And so, I want to kind of do some research around that. It's centered in rural North Carolina. I interviewed some teachers that taught PK-12. They spoke Black language, or what I termed as Africana Vernacular English. And I coined that term because I wanted to pay homage to my ancestors and to capture how some descendants of the African diaspora use language in ways that are deemed not acceptable in mainstream English. And so you may hear me using the term Black language or Africana Vernacular English interchangeable, but I did coin the same term, Africana Vernacular English. Again, this work, our chapter, The Effects of Academic Language, I'm sorry, the effects of academic language in ELA and Black students' disenfranchisement. It examines how linguistic profiling and anti-Black linguistic racism marginalizes Black language speakers. I'm a former educator, and I would, sometimes tell my students pretty much to leave their culture at the door because they may say something like, I ain't got no pencil, or, I'm fitting to go to the bathroom, and I would correct them. And, for me, as a Black language speaker, I should have been more accepting to that because I knew exactly what the students were meaning. But because we've been accustomed to and we've been trained to speak what we deem as proper English, I was correcting those students. And in me doing that, I was pretty much asking those students to leave their culture, to leave their home language, to leave their identity at the door. And that is so harmful. And now that I've done this research, I want to spread the knowledge and inform other educators that we need to change our practices. We need to be more inclusive to linguistic justice and allowing these students to be themselves. Reflecting on my own learning experiences, although it's been about, I won't say, but it's been many years ago that I was sitting in these classrooms. And I remember, I'm having white teachers, I'm mostly white students. I'm going to libraries that have books, more books about brown horses and folks with brown faces. And then I'm being told repeatedly, don't speak your language, or, you don't speak this way, or that's not acceptable in this classroom. And for me, where I should have been in a place of educational liberation, I started to deem my language, my heritage, and my Blackness as inferior. And so, throughout my academic journey, I was constantly reprimanded for using my home language. And it led me to internalize that my Blackness wasn't good enough, or my Black language wasn't good enough. And so I started to code switch. I started to conform to the expectations of speaking proper English to make the standards of the educational system as well as the white mainstream language. And so in doing so, I felt pressured, to suppress part of my identity, which is my language. And so, I just feel like where we are now in terms of is it my 4 minutes?
Sorry to be doing
I'm
this.
sorry. I just have a little bit more.
No, please.
Okay. I was gonna say
your last sentence.
Okay. I was just gonna say that this chapter pretty much, it speaks to those that are curious about the dismissive or the passion that are dispassionate about linguistic justice. It explored the lived experiences of Black Afrikaner vernacular English speaking teachers and how they incorporate their Black language in their pedagogy and how it has transformed their classroom, and their students feel more welcome and they feel a sense of belonging. Thank you to everyone. Thank you to the editors for including us in this work, and I look forward to moving forward with what we're doing to inform and to educate. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Manisha. Thank you. Thank you. And now we go to Mariana Reclefs. I think Mariana joined.
Yes, I'm here. It's the morning here. Good morning from Illinois and the Midwest United States. Congratulations to all, and thank you very much for the opportunity to contribute to this book and to participate in this panel. I'm humbled and honored by being in the midst of all these eminent scholars. So thank you. My chapter reports a mixed methods research investigating whether university bilingual students who were teacher candidates uphold or challenge traditional views of standardized, and using quotes here, and academic language in quotes too, particularly about Spanish for students in bilingual programs in Illinois. When this research took place a few years ago, the Spanish language art standards had been approved at the state level, and these mirrored Common Core state standards, English language arts in the United States. These Spanish language arts standards included controversial and linguistic augmentations, and using quotes here because that is the term used in the Spanish language arts document. To talk a little bit about the context, bilingual
Lillian, your line is, can we mute your line? Hello? Oh, sorry. Please go ahead, Mariana.
May I continue?
Please.
That was weird. Okay, the context of this study were bilingual students enrolled at a large university bilingual teacher preparation program, even though not all of them were fully bilingual, Spanish-English or English-Spanish, they were taking these classes. And the research study basically uncovered juxtaposed racial linguistic ideologies embedded in perspectives of Spanish, quote, academic language, and on particular Spanish language arts for standards for bilingual programs in the state. The chapter also provides insights on specific relevant demographic and experiential factors that influence these underlying racial linguistic ideologies. So here we see that it refers to racial linguistic ideologies as a frame which connect race, language, and social class and underlie conceptualizations of academic language, as Sultan Turkan and Jamie Schussel have referred in the book. The academic language is racialized in relation to systems and structures of white supremacy and colonialism. And we have heard also from Dr. Faltis and Dr. Ardell as well, and the previous, any of the previous speakers. So I think this study was important too, as we heard a little bit, because it's a situated representation of what we have heard of what happens when bilingual students grow up with these internalized racial linguistic ideologies about themselves, about their language, about expected standards to promote in bilingual education programs, which are now in place, running well in the state. Something else, one of the quotes from in the chapter are the following: Spanish from Spain is more formal. This is what the students, the bilingual students who are going to be bilingual teachers said. Spanish from Spain is more formal, and I'm using all quotes here, more proper and more strict, but seems to be old, almost like the old English we could see if we read the U.S. Declaration of Independence. So you see the conflict some of these students have by upholding contradictory racial linguistic ideologies at the same time. Some of them would say also that they remember when they were in Spanish classes, foreign language in high school, and how the teachers would scold them because they would not use peninsular Spanish. For example, they wouldn't say vosotros sois, vosotros vosotros queréis, you have, you want, things, you are, things like that, that would reflect more closely what is considered standard, and I'm using air quotes here, standard Spanish. Although I know there are also linguistic varieties all over Spain in different dialects. So I saw a comment in the chat about, yeah, language is rich, language is fluid, language is complex. So what this chapter points also to is the need to have this critical conscious pillar in Deborah Palmer and others talk about this critical consciousness, and Dr. Faltis mentioned it too, that is necessary in teacher education programs, especially bilingual, future bilingual teachers who may focus, and probably the programs themselves focus on techniques, right? And how to have the toolkit. I hear that a lot among colleagues, to have a toolkit of strategies and techniques to teach children, multilingual learners and bilingual learners, translanguaging students, dual language learners. But sometimes we overlook the ideological structures that underlie beliefs and practices. So this study points to that again, need to address racial linguistic ideologies and to develop that critical consciousness in our students. I also want to say that part of those ideologies we need to deconstruct is linguistic purism and the language hierarchies that exist in different languages, not only English, not only Spanish. As I have spoken with Chinese students, they also speak of language hierarchies among different linguistic varieties. So I'm looking forward to listening to your questions, and thank you.
Thank you so much, Mariana. Thank you. Thank you. So we now move to Melody, Zoch, and colleagues. Melody, over to you. Is Melody in the room?
Yes, I'm here. I'm joined with my colleague, Dr. Bev Faircloth. I'm going to let her speak first.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you, Melody.
You're muted, Bev.
We can start.
Okay, I'm unmuted now, right? So
Okay,
you can hear me?
Yes.
go ahead.
Okay. All right. So Melody and I, along with our two co-authors, are privileged to be situated in a community that has one of the fastest growing refugee immigrant resettlement populations in the country. In the local schools, there are over 120 languages represented from 140 countries. And being a part of a school of education, it became quite obvious that it was our role to embrace, to honor, to make space in our work for that rich diversity. And so we began partnering with friends and colleagues in the many communities and the programs where this rich diversity were located in our city. And we reached out to middle grades age and high school age students and invited them to a writing camp on our university campus called Community Voices. Community Voices is a 2-week summer camp that takes place in the morning from 9 to 12 and involves a lot of different aspects of their lives and becoming familiar with the university life and embracing their languages. The local school system generously provided transportation, breakfast, snacks, and lunch for this group of students. And our goal was to affirm and amplify their voices by integrating their culture, their language of origin, their identity, their lived experiences into writing. And so the very first thing we realized as we got started was we had to focus on building a community with these youth. We had to center things on them. We had to hear from them. We had to hear about their lives. And that became crucial before we took on anything that had to do with writing, just creating that safe, affirming place. And then we tried to center their writing on their experiences, their stories. So they were allowed to write in whatever language they were comfortable. They were allowed to use art. They were allowed to work digitally. They were allowed to work together. There were 40 students most years of this camp, and the 2 years represented in this chapter there were 20 that came both years. And like I said, we focused on community and centering this on amplifying and affirming their voices. Melody.
And in addition to that, we also put at the forefront choice. So we gave them choice about languages they wanted to write in and share in, and also the ways they were able to compose. And so when we do this, we'll leave you with a quote that kind of sums up what we learned and our big takeaways from this. Through our work with resettled youth, we have learned about the ways in which the youth represented and negotiated their identities through their writing. Using identity work as a foundation and framework for writing engagement, rather than traditional notions of academic language, we created a space where the youth utilized their full linguistic repertoires. In doing so, we were able to amplify and affirm the youth's writing identities as we learned about their resettlement experiences and how they have constructed their own narratives of hope and resilience. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Melody and Beth, for this wonderful talk. Dimitri Deckweiler, I think Dimitri joined. Over to you, Dimitri.
Wow, yeah. Hi, everybody. Thank you. So my interest in the chapter that I contributed to this wonderful volume is how the construct of academic language functions not at the levels of individuals so much, but at the level of institutions, and kind of understanding it as part of a system of sorts. And particularly how academic language fits into the system of higher education in Canada as a settler colonial state, with maybe some lessons for other societies with historical parallels, like the United States. And my focus was on English for academic purposes, or EAP, which is one of the dominant approaches to teaching and researching academic language in higher education. So this piece of the study took place during my PhD studies, which I did at University of British Columbia. And for my project there, I spoke with teachers from 5 provinces. Since that time, I'm now at Georgia State University in Atlanta, Georgia. And I'm sorry for joining a bit late since I just came from teaching a class. Anyway, my chapter presents a discourse analysis of interview data with a research participant from Ontario who was working at a 2-year college where she was advocating for them to implement an EAP program. This would become the grounds for better supporting their current international students who had a lot of really challenging obstacles, and also recruiting additional international students to the college. And these students, primarily from the global south, were academically unprepared and economically impoverished. And according to her, their motives were also questionable. They were there not just for schooling, but for work and even immigration purposes. And English for academic purposes was presented by this participant as a process for socializing these students, not just into academic language, but even into things like using educational technology and the learning management system, choosing age and gender appropriate career paths, and just broadly like being socialized into insiders of sorts, into the order of settler Canada. In other words, academic language was being presented here as a process for socializing outsiders to potentially become insiders in that settler colonial order. However, this process also has an economic dimension in that it was expected to generate revenue for the college. I think that's a situation that is probably familiar to many of the folks on this call. So what I propose in this chapter is that we can view this process of providing academic language as a process of financial extraction. Not just financially, but also the attention and the time of these students are also being extracted. And there are racial dimensions to this process, as the students are typically racialized as other than white, and certainly not native speakers, in air quotes, of English. So within EAP scholarship, there's been a long-running tension between critical perspectives, challenging some kind of power and hierarchy, and what we might call the mainstream perspective, which is often criticized as being accommodationist. And I want to argue that underlying this debate, we first have to understand academic language teaching in higher ed as a form of extraction. And this ties into discourses of higher ed as a quote unquote industry that must be quote unquote internationally competitive, as is a very common posture in many English dominant countries today. Ultimately, this rests on recognizing that it's an industry that's built on extraction from minoritized people, and the minoritization of these people is a condition of their exploitation in the system. Thus, academic language can be seen as one piece of a system of economic domination and really sustaining the racial capitalist order that we talk about with respect to higher education in Canada, the US, and elsewhere. So that's kind of a high-level view of my talk. I wanted to understand academic language as a piece of these larger systems. There.
Thank you so much, Dimitri. Thank you. Thank you. I think we want to go back to Madiba. I think he is in the room. Jamie informed. Can we go to Madiba's?
Yes. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, sorry. I think I was muted, and unfortunately, I'm not going to put on my camera. We were just welcoming students here, so I'm not really in my office. So I will just, you can see my picture there. So my chapter focuses on translanguaging as a strategy for maneuver. So the chapter is based at the University of Cape Town in South Africa, which is historically an English university. In South Africa, universities in the past were divided according to language. You have those that speak Afrikaans or Dutch, or those that speak English, and others just mixture. So the University of Cape Town is one of the top university, highly ranked. I think it's university number one, on the continent, but it is a historically English university. I was appointed to this university in 2005 to coordinate as a director of multilingualism. But then the university wanted to find a shift towards implementing other languages. South Africa is a multilingual country. We've got 11 official languages, and one of them, of course, is English. So as part of my project, this project came up after my visit to Birmingham, where I worked with people like scholars like Adrian Blackledge, Angela Chris, and there I presented the practice that I was observing at the university. And then I established myself into the notion of translanguaging, and that became a big project. So this publication that I've published here on maths, it was based on that. So it purely focused on the language practices of multilingual students. How do they draw on from their full linguistic repertoires? And here I was observing the tutorials that were happening over weekend on weekends, and how students that are multilingual, move across the language. How do they go around, the dominance of English? So you can see from the data that I have, it's huge. This is just a part of that, but I collected huge of data, using linguistic ethnography, interviewing students, and so on and so on. So it was very clear that multilingual students, although they are good in English, but they will keep on drawing on from their other linguistic repertoires. They'll use their local languages there in discussing maths, solving maths problems, and so on. So that's the whole process was very fascinating. And then when you translate it, they will be given worksheets in those tutorials. And from that worksheets, they will group themselves according to languages and so on, or maybe a mix of languages. But then they will be able to go through all the worksheets and solve all the problems. Those who are using English, they will do the same thing. Those who are using other languages. But the whole process for these other multilingual students, it was very clear that they want to go around the dominance of English. I even asked them, but why do you do this? They say, Prof, we want to become comfortable. It's for our comfort. We feel we are able to make meaning better. We are able to draw on from our own, culture. We are also to express our identity in the process and so on. So I came up with this topic title that says, translanguaging here is not just being used because students are deficient, but because students want to maneuver the dominance of English. And from that, I presented the findings of this study to the university, and other faculties adopted that approach. Beyond the university, I presented this to other universities. In fact, at the end of that big project, we produced a video film. That film, the title is also Translanguaging as Maneuver, because all the data that we've collected seem to really show how multilingual students in a context where there's power relations, where their languages are dominated by the hegemony of English. Students draw on from their own local languages to maneuver English. So that is, I think, in short, the purpose of this. People who use this now mainly. I play this video. I do workshops for other universities, even nationally, and so on and so on. And people are beginning to identify the kind of strategies that one can apply in the classroom while you are teaching multilingual students at higher education. I think that's all.
Thank you so much. That's exactly on time, Atiba. You're the most punctual. Thank you so much.
Thanks.
And sorry,
Okay.
there was a confusion about you joining earlier, but wonderful to have you here.
Okay. Thanks so much.
I know you had to move your meetings around to be here, and I love having you.
Yeah.
So we have myself and Jamie to conclude our talk today, if that's okay. Jamie, give me a thumbs up if that's all right with you, or...
I was unmuted. Yeah, that's fine. I'll keep mine very brief.
Or I will try to keep mine brief as well, if that's okay with you, Angelica, as well, or we can skip hours and go
Yeah.
into question
No,
answer.
that's okay. We can have about 5 minutes to conclude.
Okay, great, thank you. Okay, so I'll time myself, obviously. This is an ethnographic, autoethnographical chapter, and it was really one of the hardest piece of writing I have ever done. I did acknowledge this to Jamie. So the chapter really takes an inwardly gaze at the self while maintaining the outward gaze of ethnography, looking at the larger context wherein self experiences occur. Inward gaze presents reflections between my international newly graduate student, transnational minority scholar self, trying to be the neoliberal good citizen, and the American corporate workplace culture. The gaze is mediated by a memory of events and remnant email exchanges between managers and the self that I kept as artifacts. So the gaze is also mediated by a surprise welcome interview with the former HR VP of the organization. During his retirement, he offered his time. And so the interview reveals a retrospective analysis of managerial meetings where he would be asked to use some of his division budget to provide English as a second language support for the Chinese researchers, which he said went on for a while at the organization. And he notes in the interview that someone somewhere within the organization would reach an arbitrary conclusion about somebody, and the march toward expelling them from the organization would be inexorable. So, and he calls the culture operate and maintain culture. He calls the culture a place that repelled invaders and welcomed pilgrims. In that if one initiated a change threatening certain status quo, they would be repelled, and welcomed pilgrims, on the other hand, would take on the stance of, oh, I am pilgrim, I came to bow and to learn from you. I quote from the chapter a very powerful moment in the interview with the former HR VP when he said, if the organization had decided, and you can see it on the screen, the part that gives the title to this chapter is when he used the Irish expression, if a spot of blood gets on the chicken, other chickens will mistake it for feed, and they will all peck that chicken to death. And ironically, this old idiom was told to me during our interview. Obviously, that I joined from Northern Ireland, my new land that I call now home. So by narrating and analyzing the account of my own lived experiences in my own voice, my intention was to assert agency, positioning myself as the ultimate authority on the other of the research, without allowing anybody else to represent my experiences. This was a loving act out of a desire to inspire those language minoritized scholars in academic workspaces to speak up and own their experiences. I hope the chapter is an inspiration to many who experience the same. So I'll end there, and you can see how I learned about Title VII while writing this in this chapter, and Lippy Green has an reflection on how the Title VII of the US can afford the space for foreign workers to be open to various forms of unregulated discrimination based on the perceived language proficiency and fluency and pronunciation, accents, and so on. I'll stop there and over to you, Jamie. Thank you.
Thank you.
Conclude this talk. Thank you so much, Jamie.
Thank you so much, Shilton. Thank you to everyone for putting in the time to be here and for these presentations today. I'm not going to go over this slide in detail. I just want to talk a little bit about the conclusion of the paper or of the book and how to kind of bring together all of these different ideas around the same topic. As Sultan and many of our other speakers have talked about, testing has a big role in our understanding of and our positioning of academic language. And that's what this chapter focused on, was going back to the construct or the idea of academic language in US testing dating back to the 1600s, so before the US was the US. And focusing more so on the work of Dr. George Sanchez, and his critiques from the 1930s on standardized testing and on academic language for racialized and minoritized students. His work and the work in this volume, I think, kind of stands together to understand ways that we can have, not instead of these kind of parallel dialogues, right? Like these more in-depth conversations about what academic language really is, and understand that it does exist as a racialized, non-neutral construct that has been a hindrance, I'll just read it, has been a hindrance for centuries to the recognition of more diverse forms of knowledge and knowing. And I think that kind of unites our book and the contributions that you've heard today and the ones that you unfortunately did not get to hear today. So with that, we can open it up for questions. I think we just have one more thank you slide for you all.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Thank you. Thank you for being here, for attending, and presenting to all of our contributing, or some of our contributing authors who could be here with us. Yeah. Questions, comments, obviously, with the wish that we continue these discussions with you all outside this platform, but we have about 10 minutes for questions and answers.
I'm going to invite Miguel because he's going to assist us in the Q&A.
Wonderful.
Thank you, Dr. Angelica Galantis, and thank you, Dr. Tarkan and Dr. Chisel, and to all our wonderful panelists today for your insightful presentations. We really learned a lot, and you gave us a lot to reflect on the issues on academic language and racial linguistics. We will now move on to the Q&A portion of this session. So please raise your hands and I'll call on you. You can also use the icons on the screen on Zoom, or feel free to submit your questions in the chat. I will read the questions. Dr. Tarkan, for the people in the auditory, so probably you can take the questions directly there, right?
Yes, I will.
Okay, and we let our panelists provide an answer to them. So, yep, if you have questions,